Okay, so we're live on YouTube, but for some reason it couldn't connect to Rockfin. And because it couldn't connect to Rockfin, it didn't want to stream onto YouTube either. But either way, we're live. Let's just wait a little bit to allow some people to trickle in, and then we can officially begin. And I'll give a formal intro. How is the bot now, Fuzz? People still got the notification
On
on
Discord, yeah.
Discord.
I got the notification on mine also.
Oh, cool. That's what's up. So like it shows up on your channel, like I mean on your like feedback. Looks like we have like 4 viewers right now. Let's wait for a few more people to trickle in. I'm also gonna share it. What's up, Tony? Oh dang, I forgot to tag you guys because my Google Chrome is all slow because I'm streaming. But there's a fair amount of people in here. Welcome everybody to Frank Analysis. I'm your host Franco. I'm joined by 3 of my friends here. We have Charles Anderson of the Lone Wolf Podcast. How are you doing, sir?
Doing very well, Franco. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm also joined by Fuzz the Fair, returning to the show. How are you doing, bro?
Doing all right. Doing all right. Howdy, everybody.
And we also have Marcus Cage, who is driving back home, and you will see him on the screen soon. How are you doing, Marcus?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me again, and fellow panelists. Good to be here with you.
Yeah, we have a lot to talk about. There's a lot that happened last week. The topics have carried over onto this week. There's also a lot that happened this week, but we'll start off by talking about what's his name? Rand Paul. Rand Paul interrogating Antony Blinken for his warmongering. Bernie Sanders didn't do it, despite Bernie Sanders supposedly being the most anti-war candidate according to Rose Twitter. But no, we have Rand Paul. Rand Paul. So I have a video clip to show everybody, and then I'll get the thoughts from my panel, and then we'll also look at what the viewers think about it. Oops, wrong thing. Here we go. All right, you guys can see that?
Like Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton, you've been a consistent supporter
Yeah, we're
of
getting it on the
military
live
intervention
stream.
in the Middle East, from the Iraq War to the Libyan War to the Syrian Civil War. Some on your side of the aisle, including the president-elect, have said, well, we were given bad intelligence. They misled us on the intelligence on Iraq. Now, that's a very specific reason. There's probably some truth to it, but I think it misses sort of the lesson of the Iraq War. Likewise, your justification for maybe coming to a new approach on the Libyan civil war is, well, maybe we overestimated the idea of having viable successors there. To me, it seems like we're still missing the point, because even after Libya, you guys went on to Syria wanting to do the same thing again, and you've argued, well, maybe we just didn't do enough. If we'd done more, we could have toppled Assad and we could have had real regime change in Syria. Well, you got it in Iraq, you got it in Libya, and it's a disaster. The lesson of these wars is that regime change doesn't work. Mostly what you've gotten through the policies you have advocated, and Joe Biden has advocated, and frankly, John Bolton has advocated, this idea of regime change has been a disaster for the Middle East. We complain, everybody around here is concerned, Iran, Iran, Iran. Well, why is Iran stronger? Who's their best friend in the region now? Iraq. You know, we did that. We had a balance of power. It wasn't perfect, but we had somewhat of a balance of power in the Middle East, and you guys messed it up. You got rid of the one bad guy, and another bad guy got stronger. And so then you went to Libya and did the same thing. And they said, well, maybe Libya's a one-off. Well, maybe there's a rule here. Maybe there's something we can learn about regime change, and maybe we can learn that humility would be that maybe we shouldn't be choosing every government in the Middle East. I would argue that instead of always choosing the governments, maybe we should not reward the bad ones. You know what I mean? So, for example, with Saudi Arabia, I despise the regime. I'd probably still trade with them. I probably wouldn't cut them off completely. I wouldn't sell them any more arms. And after they killed Khashoggi, they shouldn't have got one bit of our armaments. But both sides advocate for this. On UAE, we tried to stop that because UAE has a terrible human rights record. Both sides support it. The problem around here is we have bipartisan consensus. The problem isn't lack of consensus. The problem is too much consensus, but the consensus is for regime change. Are any of the lessons you've learned from the failure of Iraq war, Libyan war, the chaos, the vacuum, and more terrorism that occurred and more lives that were lost, and then to go on to Syria? I don't get that there's been a lesson learned.
Senator, I think we and I certainly have an absolute obligation to try to learn from everything we've done, advocated, to take into account the results, and to make that inform how we think about these problems going forward. And I've done a lot of hard thinking about some of the very situations you mentioned. I'm proud of the fact that I have spent all of my career during the times I've been in government, for the better part of 25 years, working to advance our diplomacy, to do everything we possibly can to make sure that diplomacy is the first answer, not the last answer, and that war and conflict is a last resort.
The next step was Syria. The next step was the Syrian civil war, which looks a lot like the Iraq war and the Libyan war.
In Syria, there were those who were advocating for a repeat of Iraq, which is to say a whole-scale intervention. That's something that I did not agree with. When we were looking at what to do in Afghanistan.
Here's the problem in Syria. There was a predictable result there. Had you gotten rid of Assad, who were the fiercest fighters over there? Al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda. The more radical you were, the better fighters you were. The program that you started with Hillary Clinton, the program to train the moderate rebels, we spent $250 million. We trained about 60. We sent 10 of them into battle, and they were captured in the first 10 minutes. It was a complete disaster. This whole idea that there were moderates over there that we were going to support, doctors and lawyers and stuff, there were, but I don't think they were out there fighting. The ones out there fighting were jihadists, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and if they'd have taken over the country, Assad's a terrible person, but I'm not positive that these people would have been better. I don't think you have completely gotten the idea that regime change has been a terrible disaster. It's created vacuums, chaos, and actually more terrorism throughout the region. So I hope you will consider that. It's important, not just for the philosophic point, but it's important for our kids. I mean, we're sending these kids over to fight in these wars. They go on forever and ever and ever, and somebody's got to stand up. And I hope you will be somebody brave enough to stand up and stop some of this.
All right, so that was Rand Paul. And panel, were you guys able to hear that?
Yeah, I got it.
So pretty much you're saying like these wars have been going on and on and on, and the problem isn't.
It's weird because it's a worldwide pandemic, but I feel like I'm at peak.
The problem isn't that there's like not that there's not enough bipartisanship. The problem is that there's too much bipartisanship. There's both parties agree on going to these wars that just never end. We've been in Afghanistan for what, more than 20 years now? Iraq is about to be 20 years. When are we going to get out of these wars? And that's what Rand Paul was saying. And it's really disappointing to see people like Bernie Sanders, who we were considering to be the most progressive candidate, to vote for somebody like Antony Blinken. And not just that, but Avril Haines and Lloyd Austin. Lloyd Austin takes money from Raytheon. Avril Haines, who has a history of supporting people like Gina Haspel, who supported torture, and also Avril Haines was an architect for the drone program for the Obama administration. So what are your thoughts on this? I guess we can start with you, Charles. I'm interested to hear in all of your historical perspectives. I think all of you guys know more about history than I do, so I'm really interested to hear about what you guys think.
Honestly, there's no logic behind it. Bernie's supposed to be, the progressive candidate here. Even though people say he's a little more hawkish, I definitely think he's a lot more hawkish than, say, someone like Tulsi Gabbard. But at the same time, I've heard him talk about endless war. I've heard him mention these things, and yet he goes out and votes for these kind of candidates to fill the Biden administration. What it really comes down to is, quite simply, Bernie Sanders needs to remove the I after his name. He is not an independent. He insults me because I'm an independent. Okay, he is a Democrat through and through. Okay, the reason he's keeping that I after his last name is just for looks, I guess. He is a Democrat. He's doing this because it's the Democrat playbook to have a united front, work together to do whatever the people in charge want done. That's what they've been doing for a long time in the Democrat Party. But one thing in particular really stood out to me, and that is when Rand Paul mentioned the UAE, for example. Now, let's rewind back. You mentioned history. We don't have to really go that far back into history. We'll just take a little trip back to 2016. When right in the middle of all the Russiagate scandal, it came out that during the 2016 election cycle, UAE were making very heavy contributions into someone's campaign. Of course, they're funneling the money through the proper channels, but there were some people who were charged for crimes connected to the UAE. They were funneling money into the Clinton campaign. As soon as Clinton lost and Trump got elected, they immediately switched gears and started funding for Trump's inauguration. They started giving money to the RNC. So right there, you see where the reason we're not butting heads with people like Saudi Arabia or the UAE is just simply because they're buying us off. So when we hear this whole Russiagate thing, to me, that was nothing but smoke and mirrors. We've got election interference coming from foreign countries. We've got good evidence of it right there, but we won't act upon anything. And the main reason they want to keep going into these other Middle Eastern countries, whether it be Iraq, Syria, Libya, well, simple as this. Iraq, we wanted the oil. Libya, they were threatening to go off the petrodollar. Okay? Syria, again, just another strategic move. And these people have been part of this war hawk status quo playbook for so long. Nothing's going to change. I think the answer he gave was one of the biggest deflections I've heard this week. It was an answer without giving an answer, in my opinion. So you can look forward to about 4 more years of Warhawk Joe Biden at this point, and Bernie Sanders is just going to bend the knee for him when it really comes down to it.
Or 3 years of Warhawk Joe Biden, and then a year of Kamala Harris, Warhawk Kamala Harris, and then some more years of that.
Yeah.
What do you think, Marcus?
Well, it's so much that I can add on to what he said. I mean, it's just, I could go so many different ways with this also, because, I mean, whether we look at currently the stuff which our government has been doing, whether it's been the right or the left, whether Bernie gets out there and does all his shouting and hollering, but occasionally he'll come and he will vote for a defense bill. He's going to still fund this stuff. And the thing is, the reason why the left has such a problem, recognizing what a true left candidate is because we've never had one. And the reason why is because when you grow up in the United States, you're given a perspective. And that perspective that you have leads those actions. So even your mildest reaction, most of the time, is still out of line with the real reality of the situation, because most Americans don't understand that we're still basically operating on the Monroe Doctrine. We go into other countries for X, Y, and Z. We tell these countries how they're going to think. We tell these countries how they're going to do business. We tell them what they can and cannot do, while we go in and hypocritically go in and literally do all the same stuff we're telling countries not to do. I mean, Bernie is not a Democrat. The only reason why he keeps that eye is to confuse those or be kind of a sheep herder. That's all that eye is about, because even when he doesn't vote for, say a major war, it doesn't really matter because he's that one vote. You got to have at least one vote out there who's giving the people who are against it a voice. And what happens is we will get wrapped up in that voice and listen to that person and kind of forget and not pay attention to all these other things that they're doing around them. For me, Tulsi Gabbard was brought up. Tulsi Gabbard is less hawkish, true, but she's still hawkish. Every American politician we have is hawkish because our mentality as Americans is that we are dominant and we're going to tell everybody else how it's going to go. So, I mean, I hope that gives you my thoughts and it fits in, and explains some things. But we have to change our mindset as Americans, as individuals, as a whole. And we have to have almost like an extreme zero tolerance to any politician who is even fine with these things or won't speak up viciously against them. That's just my take.
Yeah, so let's bring Fuzz into the conversation. What's your take?
So people shouldn't really be surprised with Bernie's history of siding with both the intelligence agency and a member of the class that he continues to root for, as Charles pointed out. And Marcus, the material evidence of what you mentioned as Bernie as a sheep herder is an article called, if I remember correctly, Bernie the Bomber's Bad Week.
Yep.
Where he has a backroom deal with Democrats in order to keep his seat independent, he must never support a third party and only sheep herd new voters into the Democratic Party. So that's one. And because of this deception, he has a tendency to lie about being anti-war, because he sided with the CIA on the, I believe it was 99 bombing of Yugoslavia. And in addition to that, he deceives people in passing off the social democracy of the Nordic model when it is fueled by NATO budget imperialism. And just replace the name of the Raytheon company of the US with the Swedish and Scandinavian Saab and Bofors defense industry that's there, that has an involvement in receiving, I believe it's 11 billion kroner in between 2017 to 2019 to have an arms deal to perpetuate the Yemen civil war. So this shouldn't really be too much surprising for anybody that's done their homework on Bernie.
Yeah, and also how he voted to increase or something about like recognizing Gaddafi as somebody dangerous, which then led to, which was an open invitation for the U.S. and its Western allies to overthrow Gaddafi. So yeah, I mean, and also how he was supportive of the Afghanistan war. He does have a history of that.
Yeah.
But
in addition to that, I also wanted to throw in that the reason he is unable to highlight actually existing socialist countries, which despite their flaws would be the actual closer definition to what he's trying to sell to the American people. But it's impossible for him to get into that because he would have to out the plans to keep the blockade in motion and the sanctions as well.
yeah. So let's bring Charles back into this. What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I think Marcus made some pretty good points. The only thing I would say as far as to what he pointed out about why Bernie's keeping his eye after his name to be that one vote, I mean, realistically, I think we could kind of turn to someone like Rand Paul on the Republican side, too, which ironically enough is kind of what this whole topic pertains to right now. Rand Paul grilling this guy when Bernie wouldn't. Rand Paul is a lot of a libertarian, but, you know, rather than run as a libertarian and be that one vote, he ran as a Republican. Bernie Sanders is definitely sheepdogging for the Democrats. So even if we're going to say that he's not a Democrat, he's without a doubt in my book playing ball for them entirely. And so that's why I say he might as well be a Democrat. When the rubber meets the road, one thing I've learned about Bernie Sanders is he talks a great game. But when it's time to put up or shut up, he always folds. He did it in 2016 when he found out that they rigged the primary against him, and he hasn't really said much about that. You know, he talks about, you know, all these things that he wants to do for our country, yet he wouldn't say anything about Julian Assange. I don't know that he's ever said anything good about what Snowden did. Okay. Just in this primary right here, he thought it was great that we got the super delegates moved to a second round of voting at the convention instead of just eliminating that crappy super delegate system all the way around. And in the meantime, when he's got mainstream media working against him, telling all their viewers, you need someone who can beat Donald Trump. Bernie Sanders can't do it, but Joe Biden can. And then he gets an opportunity to pitch for himself. And they toss the question, can Joe Biden beat Donald Trump? And you say yes. I mean, he did himself in. So without a doubt, you know, Bernie Sanders, we can debate who's more of a hawk. But at the end of the day, he's not only got a reputation of being kind of hawkish, he's just a sellout.
It also doesn't live up to what the hopes that I had and many other people who supported him in 2016 and 2020 had, which is like, oh, he learned from his mistakes from the past. Yes, he made some mistakes when it comes to foreign policy, but now he's trying to fix those mistakes. He's not trying to be as imperialistic as he used to be, that he's better now. And he's also not using the popularity that he has. You know, he can ruin those politicians' lives by using the support base that he has. He has millions of people who support him and who will have his back. But I guess he doesn't see that. I guess he's too much in the circle of DC, that he cares too much about his reputation in his inner circle, and he's not seeing all these people that have his back. I don't know if you agree with that, Marcus. What do you think?
Well, I completely agree. I mean, I guess I'll kind of clarify something I said before. I do think he's a sheep herder, but does he even know he's a sheep herder? I don't know. I don't know if he is doing this intentionally or if he just doesn't have the spine in him when it comes down to it. Whether they have something on him, in his past, or whether he just doesn't have the confidence to think that he can really get the movement. Well, I know he has the confidence, because he said if he became president, he would use them. He would literally go to certain politicians' districts and kick up a shitstorm. And so if he knows that he could have did that as president, to all of a sudden sit there comfy with your hands folded in those nice little mitts, it doesn't look good for me. That just looks suspect. And when it comes down to it, I come from more of an activist background, and just a person who's like, this is what this says, this is what that says, this is what you either stand for or you don't. And so I'm not with somebody who gets in and decides to try to play the Washington games. Now, he may think that he's clever enough to, okay, well, I'm going to submit on this, but I'm really going to sneak these other things in. And he could be that delusional. But either way, any of these options, it doesn't look good for Bernie. And Charles brought up a great point about Rand Paul. He's the same thing. He's really a libertarian, but he's playing that role for those Republicans who got a little bit of a wild streak to him. I mean, that's the only thing he's doing. He's like the Republican who's cool with smoking pot and then just want the government out of their business. And, you know, that's it. But he's not going to literally take that move into the libertarian lane and try to push for all of those objectives and principles. And that's what his purpose is, I believe, in the grand scheme of things, because they need controlled opposition, you know. And so to kind of keep us in check, you know, you got to put somebody out there who's speaking for us, you know, air quotes, and that settles down, you know, some of the anger and some of the pressure which is coming from the outside. And I think that, you know, the people at the top, and I'm not talking about politicians, I'm talking about the actual people who make these things move, the consultants, the analysts, these people who sit there and read through all these polls and all that at the top. They're the ones who figure out what they can get away with, how many people are ticked off in these areas. Can we skip these votes here? Can we get enough people registered that they'll vote down ticket? And even if we lose them on the presidential or certain Senate races, well, we can still play around with the votes and stuff. Because like Charles brought up about, there's still manipulation going on. It's not Russia. And I'll just go ahead and throw it right out there. Israel is heavily involved in manipulating our election. Not only them, but Iran, their computer technology has been proven to break through our firewalls also, and North Korea has been involved in our election. Not only them, there's plenty of South American countries also. So to try to put it on one nation, people need to start paying attention to the propaganda which is put out, because they can literally just pick a country and decide and have evidence to prove it. But why do they want you to be upset with these particular countries is what you should be asking.
Yeah. And Rob Juno, thank you so much for the super chat. He said, oops, somebody said Julian Assange, have my money. I think it was Charles, that you're the one that brought it up, right? Yeah, silence on Assange is contributing to imperialism, because what Assange did was he revealed war crimes. And the only politicians that have brought up Julian Assange's name was Tulsi Gabbard and Matt Gaetz and Thomas Massey. It's really unfortunate. It's really that if people aren't speaking about Assange or other whistleblowers like Assange, it's because they're being tools for the establishment, for the multinationals that want to continue these wars abroad in which they're going to profit. Zach Ortega, thank you so much for the super chat. He said, Franco, keep up the hard work. I wish mainstream media, many journalists, had half the integrity you do. Thank you so much. And I will say that the audience members here, you guys also have a lot of integrity, and my guests here have a lot of integrity as well. Fuzz, do you have anything else to add on? And then there's some questions I want to ask you guys that I found really interesting that you guys have said in the past.
Nah, you can go forward.
I've heard both Charles and Marcus mention before that there's something there's a part of the Bible that says that these wars that are happening in the Middle East are never ending. Yep. So what you guys want to what do you think about that? What can you elaborate from what you read there in the Bible? Do you think that if the U.S. pulled out of these wars, that they would continue? Like, what do you think?
So, I have a very religious family, and I had to spend 6 years in a Christian school, so I got kind of familiar with this. It goes all the way back to the story of Abraham. Okay, now the people who were descendants of the Israelites, people of Jewish faith, they trace their heritage back to Isaac, who was the son of Abraham, the son that in Abraham's old age he thought he would never have. God came to him and his wife and said, I'm going to give you a son. Needless to say, his wife was supposed to be really, really old. Okay, I'm going to try to give you a simplified version, but just to lay everything out, his wife laughed at the idea and was like, I'm too old to have a kid. Okay, so because they didn't think they could bear a child, Abraham made a child with his maid, and the son's name was Ishmael. Well, God got pissed off at this whole thing and said, like, no, you weren't supposed to have a kid with her. I didn't say that. And so because he pissed God off, he then banished the maid and the kid out into the wilderness. They then had Isaac. Okay, people, again, the Israelites traced their heritage back to Isaac. Abraham was the father of many nations. Take a guess which group traces their heritage back to Abraham through Ishmael. People of Muslim faith. Okay, they all trace their heritage back to Abraham through Ishmael. What it says by following in the Bible is your sons will fight until the end of time. And if you go back through history, they've been fighting nonstop. I mean, literally, I think Ventura described it best. Regardless of what we think about Columbus here, why did Columbus set sail to try to find another trade route to India? Okay, because at the time, the only way they knew to get there was to travel through the Middle East. At the time, they also believed that the world was flat. Some people didn't, but the majority of the world believed that the earth is flat, and if you go too far, you will fall off the face of the earth into an abyss filled with monsters. So in other words, it was so damn bad back then that they were willing to set sail and risk falling off the face of the earth, then go through the Middle East to get to India in 1492. And yet it's still a disaster today. So, I mean, if you're not religious, if you're agnostic, I can understand. But, you know, and so, even the story I just laid out from the Bible, right? People are going to say, okay, that sounds funny, you know, make believe, whatever. But, I mean, hey, tell me where that one line, because it's factual that those two cultures trace their heritage back to Abraham through those two sons. He was referred to as the father of many nations, okay? And it says, your sons will fight till the end of time. Well, the clock's ticking, and they're still fighting, and I don't see any signs of them stopping anytime soon. Do you?
Yeah, I know Marcus might want to chime in on that. What do you think, Marcus?
Actually, I was going to say, I'll say, you know what, Charles, go ahead, fill out a little bit more. I'm actually almost home, and so that way I can, you know, really just lay it out, because a lot of things he said in there are definitely accurate. Ishmael is described as the wild man, and it basically said that he would be, you know, perpetually at war. But there are a couple of other things which I like to add in there when it starts going into Isaac, and that's where things get a little bit more complex. Because Isaac had two sons, and so the promise goes on after Isaac, and a lot of people only focused on the story of Jacob. And so Jacob is where the 12 tribes come from, and those were the I guess the Israelite nations. And I'm not going to go, I guess I won't name all the tribes right now unless somebody has questions. But where the term Jews comes from is from the southern kingdom. When the kingdom split in half, the northern kingdom was Israel, and the southern kingdom was Judea. There were three tribes that were in that southern region. That would have been Judah, which Jews, that's where that comes from. You could be considered a Jew if you were from Judah or from Judea. The other tribe that was in there, the other major tribe, was Benjamin, that was with Judah. And then throughout all of the different tribes, the tribe of Levi is spread through every.
Oh man, he was about to go in. He got cut off. So we'll get back to Marcus when he's able to gain connection again. But Fuzz, are you aware of like when the modern day Palestinians started living in that region that they're in now?
Hello.
Yeah, hello.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
There's some background noise though.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Okay, I guess if you can hear me now, what was the last thing you heard?
The tribe of Benjamin.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. So you had the tribe of Benjamin, and throughout the other tribes, throughout each tribe, the tribe of Levi is throughout each tribe because that's the tribe of the priesthood. And so their job is to keep the law, to explain the law, to, set up the judges and things like that. And a bunch of other things, the sacrifices and everything. Well, the other side of that coin, which is never talked about, is Esau. Esau is the brother of Jacob. And it says it would be a perpetual war with them also. And it also said Esau would live by the sword. And so no matter where Esau would be at, Esau would be fighting also. And so I guess that's the one little thing I wanted to add in there, because that's a part which a lot of people don't talk about. And on my show, Hebrew Apologetics, we will definitely go deep into it.
Yeah. So you said you guys were talking about the tribe of Esau, and so who would be like the modern day descendants of that?
No, see, that gets a little controversial, and a lot of people don't like to name names on it. The theory, which is kind of commonly accepted by most scholars, is that Esau would be I guess, one of the Arabic tribes. So possibly Saudi Arabia, UAE, something like somewhere around there. Then there are certain Hebrew Israelite camps which believe that they are a Jordanian tribe, which is kind of somewhere, unknown. And then there's also the other Hebrew Israelite theory. Well, two. One, that the people who consider themselves, Jews today and dwell in the land of Israel, they are actually the tribe of Esau. And then there's the other one, which has a theory which I don't subscribe to, that basically every white person is the tribe of Esau.
So there's some people in the chat that are saying that the U.S. is the last successor to the Roman Empire. Do you guys buy that? We're like, is the Roman Empire in the U.S.? And then what would that make like Israel and like the current people who are in power in Israel, like Bibi Netanyahu? What would that make those people like? What do you guys think? Is the U.S. going to be the last Roman Empire, or do you guys think there's going to be another one?
I don't know, just because realistically, I think we've got to look beyond the imperialism of what the Roman Empire was. We've got to look at the fact, yes, they went out, they conquered, but a lot of their structure wasn't wasn't that different from ours. So, a lot of what I see on the horizon anyway, and there's actually new reports about some of this that come out today. The next big power that I see coming along in the world is China. And I don't think China, even if you want to say that they're kind of practicing, in my opinion, a form of imperialism, just in a better way than us. They've got the whole what is it, the Belt Road Initiative and all that. They're getting their hands into a lot of these countries without trying to drop bombs and take it by force necessarily. You know what I mean? They've played this game a lot smarter than the people in the U.S. have. But the problem is, I don't know that you've got to look at the similarities between like our government structure and a lot of what, the Roman Empire and the Greeks were built off of. A lot of ours stuff kind of very similarly takes lessons from that. And I don't know that the Chinese does. As far as power is concerned, you might be able to kind of make a comparison there, but I don't think that they're going to be as common to Rome as we are. And I don't know that anybody else is going to be able to bypass us or China and take that mantle anytime soon. So
it's definitely very clear that the U.S. is imperialistic. It's been imperialistic for a long time. I don't know if I would go as far as to call China imperialistic, though. I don't know if like showing up to the negotiation table with a suitcase instead of a bulldozer as imperialistic. What do you think, Fuzz? Like, I've had Carl Zaw on the show before, and he was an advocate for China. He acknowledged that there's still some bad things like censorship in China. But what's your take? Do you think that China is set to be the next Roman Empire after the U.S.? Do you think that what they do is imperialism? What do you think, Fuzz?
In terms of them being like a Roman Empire, that role is way closer to the U.S. than for China. Because as you mentioned, there's not as much hostility when it comes to their economic practices being placed into certain parts of the world in regards to infrastructure. There are, however, some people, some socialists who would see China's inactivity in supporting other socialist movements as a fault of it, since this is one universal principle in socialism, no matter how you look at it. But they're not really, I don't really see them on any sort of path of hostility like the U.S. currently is.
Yeah. So Marcus,
if I can clarify on that too, China is not hostile. When I was saying imperialism means, like the hostility of taking power through violence, hostility, war. China's not doing that, and that's what I meant by they've played this game a lot smarter. I think they're definitely trying to expand their influence, kind of like what we did where we went to Iraq to expand our influence. They've done it in a different way. They're not hostile. They're expanding their influence, whether it be through diplomacy, whether it be through because they've been able to acquire a lot of a country's debt, like in our case, for example. They're getting an upper hand on countries and kind of putting them in debt to them in certain ways. The Belt Road Initiative, the debt that we owe because we had to fund war for all these years. They're getting an upper hand without having to drop a bomb. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, they've got their connection. They've got a heavy influence in what North Korea does. Technically speaking, what is it? I think it's Taiwan, right? Taiwan considers themselves a separate country, but the Chinese government technically says you're part of us. And that was a big scandal when Trump first took office, and he called, I think, the president of Taiwan or whatever, which no other president had done. And it was a big scandal. Oh, this is going to piss the Chinese off. You've also got to take into consideration what's going on with Hong Kong. It was a British territory sold back to the Chinese government. a lot of their structure, their judicial system was still really based upon the British style. But now the Chinese government's starting to kind of encroach, you're going to come back into our fold now. So again, they're not, I guess, by the definition of imperialists, they've been able to get their power and influence into these other countries, again, without having to fire one bullet or drop a bomb. They've done it in a very smart way. So that's what I mean by they could be the one day when we crumble because we can't run our country anymore. They're on the growth. They're on a lot of growth right now. So they could really surpass us as the world's biggest superpower. But I just don't know that they're going to be that similar to Rome is what I meant. But that's the only country I see getting that kind of power in the world besides us. They're just not going about getting that power the way we did.
Yeah. Marcus, I've had a conversation with you off camera. You told me about there's a part of the Bible that predicts there being like a new Babylon that's going to have similar characteristics. Correct me if I'm mistaken. Similar characteristics to the original Babylon, to Egypt, and to Rome, and that it's pretty clear that it's the U.S. Please correct me if I'm mistaken there. And that does it say anything about what comes after that? Like, is there going to be another Babylon after that? Okay.
Well, it's not going to be another Babylon. Actually, what's going to happen, and it's kind of funny because most Christians kind of understand this, but they don't really think about the question. If you ask them just like that, it literally says that the return of the Messiah, that's what's going to happen. And so what you will have is you'll have all this death and destruction and all of these things going on, all these wars and everything. But afterwards, it's going to be a new kingdom set up here on earth. And basically, that's when some of the actual spiritual parts of the Bible where you'll actually see and experience, whereas more of this stuff is based upon faith. Because if you go into the Bible, it literally says, like, God decided to hide his face from the world. So, yeah, I can understand plenty of people being atheists because he said, I'm not dealing with you people. And so there's certain nations which literally, God, names 7 nations in particular that they are literally his enemies. And so they have to be dealt with first. And then it's like, he says he likens his judgment to a ring. And it's no quick in it, and it's not slack. And so whatever happens, basically, what goes around comes around, it's going to come back around. So everything will have to be recompensed first. And then everything can be smoothed out. And it says after that time, it's going to be peace on earth. All nations will be, at peace and at ease. And because it literally says that you'll beat your weapons of war back into plowshares. So that's talking about farming and agriculture. But that's what's coming. You were correct about the Mystery Babylon. Mystery Babylon, it says that, yes. It also describes her as the Great Whore, also.
The Great Whore?
The harlot.
Yes, literally in the Bible.
Huh.
Yeah.
Because of what it...
I was going to say, if anyone's ever listened to Avenged Sevenfold, the metal group, the Beast and the Harlot, that's a direct reference to Revelations. The Beast is supposed to be what he's referring to after Babylon. You've got the Beast that comes out of the sea. And on the beast sat the harlot, and she's draped wearing jewels and a robe. What he's referred to comes from the book of Revelations in the Bible. It's basically what's going to take place at the end of time before Jesus comes back.
Yeah, if you like, I'm in Revelations literally right now. I got my Bible here, but
nice.
Yeah, it literally says that the people who would control the world in the end times, because see, a lot of Christians don't know about, here, I'll show you real quick. And notice, I'll hold it up to the camera so you can see. This is just a simple King James Bible, 1611 edition. Now, what I'll show you here, this little part right here. You see, let's see, let me pull it back. You see that right there? That says the Apocrypha. This is a part of the Bible. Now, pretty much every Bible except for the Roman Catholic Church cuts these 14 books literally out of the Bible. Now, when you cut those 14 books out of the Bible and then you tell everybody they're complete heresy, don't listen to it, don't read it, you miss a big chunk of what the message and story and some of the stuff. And you especially can't understand the New Testament properly or what they're talking about when they start going into some of these prophecies about the end times. Because what that's talking about, what does it say? I think it's a dragon, red dragon that comes up from the sea with seven heads. That's talking about nations. Mm-hmm. And the great whore that's sitting upon those nations, controlling those nations in a sense. That's what it's talking about. And it's talking about that her cup filled with abominations, getting them all drunk on it. And what that's talking about is a nation which is pushing all its doctrines, good, bad, whatever it's doing. It's war, it's, taking things, everything. That's literally what it's talking about. Whoever that nation is, who's sitting at the top, who's powerful. And it calls it a great whore because it's everywhere. It's with every nation. It takes every philosophy, every idea, whatever. It doesn't have its own centralized culture. Now, when it's talking about those traits, like when it describes the Roman Empire, it describes, what was it, Rome, Egypt, and Babylon. Well, for those who don't know what was, the thing about Babylon is Babylon was a bunch of people from a bunch of different nations who were all trying to become one. That was the biggest thing about Babylon. How I understand the Bible is God is fine with working together, but he doesn't want everybody to just be one person, one idea, one, thing. Everybody has their different cultures for a reason. He created all that. He doesn't want it to just turn into some generic, whatever, print and play. And so when they were trying to do that, they started also trying to create their own different gods. And so if everybody's the same and they create these new gods, it goes against him. So that's one thing that that was the Babylon reference. The next thing, because a lot of people in Babylon were atheists too. Atheists, or they worship all kind of Moloch and, sacrificing babies and a lot of horrible stuff. Then you have Sodom, which a lot of the Christian church goes into Sodom because of the homosexuality. But not only was that one of the things he was upset about, is they were heavily against God, and they also were brutal towards any kind of passerbys who came in the city. If you just came in the city just randomly into Sodom, you could have been robbed, murdered, whatever. And because of how they treated a stranger, that's a big thing which God talks about in the Bible, how you treat a stranger. And so that's another kind of mark against them. The last thing, when it talks about Egypt literally means bondage. And if you look it up in Exodus 2, it says, it refers to it as the house of bondage. That's what Egypt is known for. If you look at America, between the blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans, there's been a lot of slavery that's went on with this nation, and more so than probably any other nation. I mean, when you go back to the Bible and you think about when the Israelites were actually imprisoned in Egypt, it was maybe 144 to maybe 215 years. It's nowhere compared to what America's done. So America would be the actual Egypt. And if you look around, actually, they've literally taken monuments from Egypt, like we have them all over the United States. I mean, the National Mall And basically that's just the obelisk phallic symbol that can take us so many different directions with, the occult. And fun fact, it's 666 feet high.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I know a lot of what he's talking about when it comes to the landmark stuff, because I've been questioned about this a lot because I'm a member of the Freemasons. But obviously one of the most famous Freemasons, George Washington. The Washington Monument is an obelisk that comes straight out of Egypt. That was an Egyptian structure. It was erected to him in his memory. So, there's all these signs that and things that we get, for example, on the back of the $1 bill, where it references a new world order, you've got a pyramid with an eye on top. You get into the old Illuminati type stuff there. So I know what he's referencing there. There's definitely a lot of Egyptian imagery that has been incorporated into our society.
Well, and another thing I thought about, just our everything, we don't even realize how Roman we are here in the United States. I mean, we go by a Roman calendar, we celebrate, almost every one of our holidays is a Roman holiday. Down to Mother's Day, Father's Day, all of it.
Easter.
Oh, and Christmas. A lot of even the Christian holidays have influence from a pagan holiday.
Yeah. Don't the holidays
Christmas, Easter? Yeah.
Don't the holidays go back even further, like before Rome even?
Yes. That goes back to Anglo-Saxon Germany. But pretty much, from what I've gathered, and Marcus, you may know a little more about this than me, but from what I gathered, basically Anglo-Saxon Germany would be basically like the UK, Great Britain, Ireland, Scotland, Germany. It's that whole area, right? And so we were pagans back at that point. And the Romans, we were speaking of the Romans, they came into the area during their conquest. And obviously the Romans, the Roman Catholic Church here, okay, so that's where their religion came from. Well, we were pagans. And the two big holidays, if I'm not mistaken, were like the summer solstice and the winter solstice. And after the summer solstice, the days start to get shorter. Now, the pagans and the Anglo-Saxons were really like farmers. They were people of the land, okay? For a farmer, daylight is of the imperative, okay? If you look past the summer solstice, the days start to get shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter until you get to the winter solstice, after which the days start to get longer and longer and longer, meaning more and more daylight. Well, what is the irony about two big important Christian holidays? Right around summer solstice, you've got Easter. Easter is the death of Christ, right? After the summer solstice, there's a death of daylight. You get less and less of it until you get to the winter solstice, in which case, when winter solstice happens, you get more and more daylight, and then we celebrate the birth of Christ. Now, that ideology is furthered when you consider about the birth of Jesus in the story. He would not have been born in a manger at that time of the year. That time of the year is completely wrong for the story to have played out that way. It doesn't fit in with the December month. So in other words, when the Romans came in to that area of the world, the Romans looked at their class and their culture as being very sophisticated. They looked at the people of Anglo-Saxon Germany as being poor, disgusting dirt farmers who were beneath them. And just like soldiers do in many cases, they've done this all throughout times. They then tried to pick up women from that area of the world. This is also how modern English was created, because they tried to originally teach the women Latin, and the Romans said, oh, no, you are not going to teach our beautiful language to these peasants. You're going to learn their language if you want to communicate with them. And they spoke Latin. They spoke the Anglo-Saxon German language. That's how English came about. So as those cultures bled together, they took, as they probably developed into the Catholicism, the Catholic religion, later on into Christianity, they took their culture, a pagan culture, and their holidays, and just rebranded it to celebrate these new holidays. So that's a very interesting fact for a lot of Christians out there.
I gotta have you guys.
One thing I'll correct you on, that those people who did that, they weren't Anglo-Saxons. But that is all the rest is true. All those people who did that, they weren't Anglo-Saxons, but they took the name of Anglo-Saxons. That's what the name that's been passed down later on. But the people who were Anglo-Saxon were the actual royalty which came in and took over. And then they came in with the Anglo-Saxon because they were very religious and all that. Going ahead. I forgot. We're leaving fuzz completely out of it.
Yeah, I gotta have you guys back on to talk about this stuff, just so that we can be familiar with like a lot of this historical stuff that's in the Bible, and then some of it are like prophecies, like they happen later on in history. So it's really interesting stuff, and it's like you were telling me, Marcus, like off camera when we had one of our conversations. It's like it helps you understand a lot of the stuff that's happening now, right? But yeah, I do want to move on to the other topics that we have here. So Jimmy Dore had on Magnus, and I can't remember his last name, but he's a Boogaloo boy, and he got a lot. What's up?
Hey, Frank, could I give you one scripture real quick? Because you asked about the end of the world. So I figure I should at least give you a scripture.
Sure, yeah.
It's a quick one. This would be Book of Second Esdras. And it says, from Abraham said unto Isaac, when Jacob and Esau were born of him, Jacob's hand took hold of Esau's heel, for Esau is the end of the world, and Jacob is the beginning of it that followed.
Let's learn more about the tribes like later on, like that conversation we had, like I think it was like 2 weeks ago. We gotta have that like for the audience to see.
I remember I got my new show that I just did. I maybe did 3 videos. It's called Hebrew Apologetics. So please look for it. It's here on YouTube.
Subscribe to Hebrew Apologetics. Yeah, if you really like the stuff that Marcus and Charles were just talking about, you're definitely gonna love the stuff that's on that channel.
And I want to have Charles on too.
Oh,
appreciate
nice.
that. I'll look forward to it.
Yeah, but let's start out with you, Fuzz. Like, what are your thoughts on Jimmy Dore having that Boogaloo guy on? I personally thought there was nothing wrong with that, and I think it's important for us to reach out to other people and understand what their actual ideology is, and not just like have these preconceived notions based off of what the mainstream tells us and what a bunch of people are saying on Twitter. Like, it's better to confirm what their actual beliefs are by having conversations with them. And if there's overlap, then that's good. It makes it easier to let them know about your beliefs and try to raise their consciousness. And maybe a little bit about your consciousness will be raised as well, because there might be some truths that you don't see that they see. What are your thoughts, Fuzz? What do you think?
Yeah, especially now that he acknowledges that it's more of a class conflict regarding the oligarchs versus the working class. And he can see past left or right differences and invite someone that's perceived as a quote unquote right-wing extremist when he sounds like he almost sounds like a leftist, like a maybe not a full-blown one, but he sounds essentially harmless. And now that Jimmy Dore clearly isn't afraid of inviting such people, he should extend the invite to the farther left, such as communists, socialists, Marxists, like historically Anti-Conquista, Bay Area 415, Hakeem, Paul Warren. All those are great channels that should be invited onto his show.
Yeah, and I'm gonna pull up that tweet that you put up for people to see. But shortly after that interview, Jimmy Dore got backlash from like the usual people who are fans of like people like Vosh and Sam Cedar. And then Sam Cedar himself was telling people, oh, look, Jimmy Dore is talking to these white supremacists, even though Magnus was telling Jimmy, no, we try to get those people who are white supremacists out of our movement. We don't want neo-Nazis in our movement. And then he even called them idiots. He called neo-Nazis idiots, and that he doesn't want them to be a part of his movement. So that's misinformation what Sam Cedar is spreading. He's just repeating what the mainstream media was saying. But of course, if it's anything to attack Jimmy Dore, he's going to do it. So Charles, what do you think, man?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, for these people like Sam Cedar to take that response, you heard what Magnus said. And I think Magnus pointed out a good thing, and that is that with the social media censorship, I think one of the big things he pointed out was previous to their censorship, these people that had these kind of ideas in their mind could come into our chat and we could talk them down and talk them out of it. Whereas once they started the censorship, these people wound up in a parlor chat somewhere and they could only just get fueled on and egged on further and further. And it was harder for us to identify these people and kick them out or talk them down and talk them out of their action. So that being said, you know, if Sam Cedar wants to condemn that group because of the actions of those people, why does he not apply that logic to any of the other movements that are out there? Namely, the big one being like Black Lives Matter, for example, right? We've got a whole movement of people who are about getting racial equality, some criminal justice reform, reform on the police, less militaristic. Some want to defund the police. But, you know, the right wing loves to point towards that element that talks about pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon. They go and they tear the town down. And what has the argument always been? Not only from the Jimmy Dores, but people like Sam Cedar. The argument has always been, well, that's not a representation of the whole group. Yet when we turn to a right-wing group, all of a sudden we can start to cherry pick those few individuals, ignore what he said on the show, and just say, no. The whole group is bad because I can point to these individuals. But they won't accept that logic on the opposite side. That's just a clear hypocrisy. It doesn't matter that it's just Sam Cedar. I mean, that could be Jimmy Dore who took a stance like that. It's a clear hypocrisy. I'm not for hypocrisy. I feel like if you're going to make a criticism, you got to be fair. And if a left group is violating those same kind of principles that you think should hold the right-wing group to be white supremacists, and because I could point to some people who probably do adhere to Black Lives Matter, who kind of adhere to the whole early Malcolm X ideology that the white man is the devil, more or less, that they're white, white people, blonde-haired, blue-eyed devils, that, oh, well, then the whole group must be bad. I'm willing to admit that's not the case. You know what I mean? But they use a warped ideology that just fits their narrative. It's very counterproductive. And I'll wrap up, without trying to take too much time, I'll wrap up on this. A couple of days later, after the Boogaloo Boy interview, Jimmy Dore brought someone else on his program. And this guy wasn't a white guy. His name's Daryl Davis. Okay? He's a black musician, blues player. He's played with guys like Chuck Berry, for example, over the years. B.B. King, okay? He made a reputation outside of music of trying to sit down and talk to people, trying to help them understand things better, overcome a prejudice. Rather than just sitting here griping and complaining, he tried to do things the peaceful way instead of just demeaning someone, trying to help them. And you know who he made his reputation of sitting down trying to talk to? People in the Klan. And he has a collection right now of Klan robes that people who left the Klan started giving him their robes because they were leaving the Ku Klux Klan. I think that's far better step in the right direction than the kind of crap Sam Cedar wants to do. Yeah. You need to be willing to talk to people, even if you have massive disagreements with them. You'd be surprised what you might learn.
Yeah. Kiska City, thank you so much for the super chat. So, Marcus, you as somebody who has said that you're open to talking to anybody who's willing to listen to you so that you can try to, teach them something, right? Because the best way that we can raise consciousness is to have conversations. So what do you think about all this?
Well, I'll first say, or just listen. You know, sometimes people just want to get things off their chest the way they feel about a certain situation or the way they perceive it. Or maybe I can be, or maybe they have some things which they can teach me also. So I always leave myself open to listening because I'm a firm believer in the Bible, and even in the Bible, it says, hear the end of the matter first. So if you're not even listening to people and you're shutting them down because of whatever perceived wrong they've done or whatever you think, you're not hearing the whole story. You don't know that that person didn't grow up in a household that lived around, nothing but black people, and they just happened to get the most hateful black people ever and beat on them and attacked them every day. I mean, you don't know what motivates people to, do a lot of things they do until you speak to them. And if somebody is just too filled with, rage or anger or hate, then okay, you have to let that go. But if they're trying to have a sincere discussion, then I feel that you're almost obligated, if you're I guess, a fair dealing, intellectually honest person, you just say, hey, let's at least hear it out. I can probably be positive I'm not going to agree, but hear them out. And people like Sam Cedar, I almost feel like I feel more bad for the people who still listen to people like Sam Cedar. I just don't get it, because at this point, when it comes to really pushing or fighting for anything, where is he? He's never really there. The only thing it seems like is that anything that Jimmy Dore does, he has to hop up and try to fight it and see if he can get some, some back and forth, clickbait off of the feud. Because it doesn't seem like he really has anything there. Just kind of jealous and knocking another man's platform. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Fuzz, as somebody who is a Marxist-Leninist like yourself, right? And I had Caleb on 2 days ago, and he was talking about who's also a socialist. He was talking to us about Fred Hampton and how he was open to talking to white people who wore the what's it called? I don't know. My mind is freezing on me. What's the name? What's the name of the flag that people wear? The Confederate flag. My bad.
Confederate.
I was having a brain fart. These white people that wore the Confederate flag. He was able to talk to them, and he was able to have them realize that wearing a flag like that is offensive to black people, and he was able to do that by letting them know about how they have the same struggles as working class people, and that their real enemy is the elite and the predator class, right? So as somebody who's a Marxist-Leninist like yourself, isn't it a Marxist-Leninist value to be open to talk to people who have different ideologies than yourself, so you can try to open their minds? Unlike people like Vash, who are trashing Jimmy Dore or trashing other people and calling them Nazis for trying to talk to people like this, right? So what would you say to that?
Well, it's essential that we try to reach out to as many people in the working class as possible, no matter what the ideology is. Though there is some limit to how, I guess, propagandized one can be under the current capitalist system. But as long as I should mention that I am still learning a whole bunch of this stuff, but there's a lot more in common across identity politics than one might think. And one of the advantages of a capitalist state is making use of racial divides to continue to have the working class divided. And it would be a long process to try to educate people into about the class conflict, to get hello?
Yeah.
To be able to have sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
It's all right. Let me pull up this tweet. You had a tweet because now that Jimmy Dore is able to talk to people like this, it's time to, because people keep saying, oh, he's reaching out to only right wingers and blah, blah, blah. Now it's time for him to reach out for people who are on the far left, like these socialists. And then you tagged a couple people who have these channels that try to educate people about socialism, about Marxism. So I'm going to pull up that tweet for you real quick. Let me zoom in here. So he said, hey, Jimmy Dore, if you say, fuck it, I'm interviewing a controversial figure from a different and extreme political side than me, can you extend the same rationale for the left and invite at Iga Legal, Esha Legal / historically, or Anticonquista or Bay Area 415 to talk Lenin and revolution? And then they all replied to you, which is really awesome. They said they're down. They're up for it. So what do you think of this? Like, how important is it for you to have these voices on Jimmy's show?
They would be educating a very wide audience that they normally don't have access to about the current struggles of, for Anticonquista, there's the South American and the global South America and the global South diaspora, where they go over the history of these countries that have had democratically elected leadership be overthrown by the U.S. and the movements that as a result of that imperialism and those overthrows, how they were able to establish their own socialist states. And this is just a continued threat to capitalism as a social order. And so that needs to constantly be smashed and destroyed. Now, for Bay Area 415, he would cover a lot of very myth-breaking facts about China that unfortunately a lot of the socialist lefts continue to be misguided on. And lastly, there's Historically, who runs a history podcast. Her name is Isha. That's the same person, and I learned a lot from her. Yeah, they normally don't have that much of an audience, but they would benefit greatly from being interviewed by Jimmy Dore.
Jimmy Dore already has the ears of a lot of independents who see through the bullshit of both parties. And he also has the ears, he even has some Trump fans that are there because they're like, I have disagreements with you, Jimmy, but because you're honest, I'm willing to listen to you. So I think it's good that he was able to bring people on like Magnus, who's from the Boogaloo Boys, to express his opinions. Jimmy Dore has also had libertarians on his show. I think the furthest left he has ever gone is bringing on people like Ben Norton and Max Blumenthal. Ben Norton, who told Jimmy Dore to listen to Lenin. But Charles and Marcus, what are your thoughts on Jimmy Dore possibly bringing on far left voices like the people that fuzz tag like Anticonquista and Historically? What do you think?
You want to go first, Marcus?
Sure, I'll go first. I would enjoy to see it. I think that it would give a lot more education to a lot of his viewers, whereas I think that they kind of see politics more a wrestling match kind of version. They do have their principles that they support and different policies, but the approach is kind of just charge the fence as hard as you can. And so there's not a lot of strategy in getting anything, actually accomplished, or how to figure out how to actually start doing direct action or writing legislation on your own, how to run for local offices, and how to actually start trying to make your own change in your own area instead of waiting for a third party to rise up that can actually have enough power, to make a difference, And I think if he got some of those voices on there, original and creative thinkers, they could pique his audience and pique him also to start thinking a little differently. And that's more what it is. We have to force ourselves to do more. And a lot of people are just kind of comfortable with simple things and what's clickbaity and entertaining at the time. And it's fun to joke around, but you get some actual scholars in there that can help school his audience.
Yeah, like Magnus and some of the other libertarian voices that Jimmy had on helped, I guess, demystify some preconceived notions that people had about those groups of people. So I think that having these voices on would help demystify some beliefs, some preconceived notions people have about socialism or Marxism. What do you think, Charles? You're more of an independent. I would say you're not too much of, you're more of a libertarian than a socialist. You'd be open enough to listen to having voices like that on Jimmy's show, right?
Absolutely, because while we may agree on whether capitalism, socialism, or communism is the best approach, at the end of the day, we've got to understand something here. I think this is, I heard Marcus mention the third party there, right? You need to be willing to talk to all sorts of different people. There's such a large percentage of our country that does not vote. Okay? Mm-hmm. You've got to capitalize on that if you ever want to make a third party strong enough to stand a chance to beat the Democrats or the Republicans. And what Jimmy, I think, has finally realized is that whether it be the libertarians, whether it be the Greens, whether it be the Marxists, the socialists, whatever, there's certain issues we're going to disagree on, but there's also certain issues we're going to agree upon. So, for example, you could talk to probably all of us and say, how do you feel about all this endless war? Everyone would say, we're tired of it, we want out of it. Okay, we've got some agreement. How about our jobs just being constantly outsourced and our middle class being ripped apart? No one's going to say, okay, yeah, I'm happy that's happening. You've got to take certain issues, strategically get everyone together. And this is kind of what I've been saying for a long time now, way before the election. You've got to get people together, even if we're going to fight like cats and dogs after this is done. You've got to get us together at least long enough to get these people out of power. We've got to focus on a core set of issues that, okay, prioritize. We can agree upon this. Let's run. We got to take the power away, and don't just focus on the presidency. You've got to hit Congress, the Senate, the state houses. You can let the presidency go if need be. If you get power in the Congress and the Senate, you could always impeach them. Okay? So the presidency is not the end all be all here. Take the power away. And then once you take your country back and you've weeded out all this corruption, you've got rid of all these bad actors, now all those disagreements we have, then we can start having good faith debate and figuring out which way is the best. But all this infighting in the meantime, Democrats and Republicans and all their corporate donors are sitting back eating popcorn like, oh, look at these idiots arguing amongst each other like they're going to get any kind of change. This is brilliant. That's how they look at it. And I think Jimmy's come to realize if we're going to stand a chance, we got to start getting people together. We've got to coalition build.
Yeah. It's sad to see that people are wasting their time arguing about what's the best direction forward, as if we already took down the duopoly, as if we already have a representative government. Let's focus on taking down that fake government that we have right now that really represents these corporations. Let's unite to take that down first, and then we'll argue about what's the best course forward. Right? And that's one of the biggest disappointments that I have with MPP, the Movement for a People's Party. and like they're not doing a good enough job at integrating people from the far left or far and or like people with libertarian beliefs. What they're focusing on bringing together people who are like Bernie, who were Bernie supporters, like Bernie supporter rejects.
Yeah.
Like that's really unfortunate to see. And tomorrow I'm going to be having on DJ Alf 7, Richard Idris, and Steve Poikinen to discuss this more. But I want to get some more of your thoughts on that. Like, why are we wasting so much time on arguing about the direction forward as if we already took down the duopoly? Like, why don't we focus on taking down the duopoly first? Why is that not happening?
Yeah, I mean, if I could hop in real quick, one thing which I've thought about, I mean, just like Charles was saying before, I used to say this to people all the time. I will take, most craziest conservative as long as he's honest and that's how he feels. Then the person who's on my side and them being a complete liar and a phony. Because when the rubber meets the road, you know which one's going to do. This person who pretends they're with you, that's all they're doing. And I feel like some of these parties, I'm not going to say which ones or who, but I feel like some of these parties are popping up, like you said, to kind of capitalize on supporters out there or try to sheep herd some more or just try to splinter. If there's a whole bunch of organizations, a whole bunch of choices, everybody's going all these different directions. And it diffuses that big, giant one movement of Bernie Sanders. Now, some could take the conspiracy theory and say, what if it was all planned to help split those parts out and dissolve the movement peacefully? Now, I don't know. Could be, could not. But that's how it's kind of worked out.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think there's a well-orchestrated plot to split apart the independents. You've got independents who believe that climate change should be the number one issue. Hence, you've got people who want to vote for the Green Party. Okay, you've got people like the libertarians who believe that we don't truly have capitalism in this country today. It's crony capitalism with too much government involvement, allowing these corporations to run amok. And that they've intervened to allow the monopolies, and in many cases they have. They've got these different priorities, and the biggest problem, in my opinion, is the media. It's social media, it's mainstream media. A lot of times on social media, people get into echo chambers. They only want to follow the people that they agree with. They watch that's why people like TYT and Sam Cedar still have an audience. They're bought into this one ideology. They're very hard-headed people. Being a Taurus, I know what a hard head is like, okay?
Hey, my moon is in Taurus. I know that too.
So they only want to hear what they agree with. That's why Fox News has their audience. That's why One America News Network has their audience. So many people over the course of time have developed this dislike of other groups because very casually, it's really, they're not so casual anymore, but they casually over time divided people on these issues. And gradually, politicians got away from discussing policy, and they started doing a lot of this culture war stuff. You know what I mean? Some people might say it started really with Nixon and the Southern strategy or whatever. But nonetheless, the mainstream media pumps people full of propaganda. They divide you. They don't want to talk about the solutions. They get these people into these ideologies, and you've got people like me and you, but they've convinced certain people that, again, the number one issue, like, for example, in the minority community, some people say if you were to talk to people, some people who are really heavily into Black Lives Matter, their number one issue might be something with the police. And that's going to be an issue where you're going to have a lot of disagreement there. Some people want to just defund the police. Other people want reform. Other people say, no, I want more. That's a very divided issue. Now, am I saying they don't have right to have that as a big concern? Absolutely not. It's been a big problem in their community. So I would expect nothing less for them to feel that way. But keep in mind, who's been enabling this kind of stuff over the years? Who's created more of a police state? Who's given the funding to arm all these police departments? Again, the people in power. They've been orchestrating this. They've been orchestrating this. When the news reports on certain situations, we can obviously point to 10 scenarios where the cop was in the wrong. If we do enough digging, we could probably point to 10 scenarios where the cop wasn't in the wrong, yet mainstream media acted like he was. They've heavily pushed this narrative, causing this kind of division. They passed the crime bill in the 90s. They locked up many minorities. They've caused a lot of these problems. They've caused these splintered fractions, and they've made it so that it's very hard to get anyone to want to talk anymore. No one wants to talk, and that's why this has such a hard time. Does that mean we should stop trying to talk? No. But they've done one hell of a job at making it very difficult to talk to a lot of people.
Yeah. I just want to read this super chat real quick before I throw it over to Marcus and Fuzz. It's from Anna Jackson. She says, Charles, I hate the way people act like black and white people hate each other. I live in Columbia, South Carolina. They are good people. I'm black. It's the institution. It's the elites that try to keep us divided, and we need to realize, like, your neighbor is not your enemy. It's the people at the top. It's not right versus left. It's top versus bottom. We need to realize that quickly, and the best way we can, achieve that is by having more conversations, like what Jimmy Dore had with the Boogaloo boy, Magnus. All right, like me, Charles, Marcus, Fuzz, we're all not going to agree on 100% on everything, but we know that we're not each other's enemies. We're each other's brother, or like people who are in the chat right now, we're brother and sister. And absolutely. It's those predators that are trying to keep us divided, and we need to unite to try to combat them. All right, we need to finally have a country that works for us, that works for working class people, working class family. Like Caleb Maupin always says, like, we need a government of action. So Fuzz and Marcus, you guys want to add anything else onto that?
Real quick, I don't want to cut anybody off, but since she brought up that super chat, I've got to tell the story. Yeah. I've got to tell the story. You might remember this story, Franco. I told it on Big Talk, Little Talk one time. Obviously, you look at me. I'm a white guy wearing a cowboy hat that's got a dip in right now. That's pretty stereotypical for just an old country boy redneck, right? One day in high school, I got this guy sitting behind me in class. He's got all his buddies sitting around him. He was a Hispanic guy, and just randomly he starts slapping me in the back of my neck. He did it 3 times. And I was trying to not make a scene, but after the 3rd time he did it, I turned around, I'm like, what do you want? He looked at me straight up and he said, well, you're a redneck, so I'm just making sure you get a redneck. Before I could even get out of my chair to take a swing at this guy, a friend of mine was sitting at a desk right beside him. Big black guy. His name was Darius. He played football for Dorman High School. He had a bottle of water sitting on his desk, leaned right over and just dumped it down his back and said, okay, I'll take care of you then. He had my back. He had my back. I mean, I didn't even have to stand up and fight the guy. He had my back. Me and him got along great. Okay? So, yeah, there's that stereotype out there, and she's from Columbia, South Carolina, so she's right here in my backyard, about an hour and a half away or so. But, yeah, it's an image that they want us to believe to create more of this division. But you'll be surprised if you just talk to people what you can accomplish.
Yeah, he had your back for sure.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Fuzz, did you want to hop in first, or do you want me to go?
I kind of need a repeat of the question.
Yeah, so it's like we need to realize that we're not each other's enemies, right? There's going to be disagreements among people, and we need to realize that it's like that it's not right versus left, it's top versus bottom. So I just wanted to know if you and Marcus wanted to add any more onto that, share any experiences that you guys had or any advice that you guys have for how we can achieve having more people in our society realize that it's top versus bottom and not right versus left or black versus white.
Well, we need to recognize where the beginning of the opportunism spread, that aside from mainstream media, because it inevitably bleeded into YouTube, and we can blame the TYTs or the TYT for that, who and the other subsequent channels who were inspired by TYT and based it off the prayer model. They picked up on those same opportunist tendencies that they got and had also gained a tendency from the mainstream media that they ultimately were all trying to copy in fermenting a divide. Because if there is too much unity, it goes against their interests. Like Sam Cedar having I have no idea. I'm not sure if it's 100% true or not, but an MSNBC contract, he had one at least at one point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's that. Then there's the $20 million from Katzenberg that fueled TYT's studio and their newsroom. And they have an interest in perpetuating Russiagate, and despite it being an obvious falsehood. So as long as enough people realize where the real opportunists and the disinformation come from, there's so much more potential for being able to unite around common issues that benefit all of us.
Yeah. Well said. So we got a super chat from the Jimmy Dore show. Looks like we have some big ears listening in. Thank you so much, Jimmy or Steph. Thank you so much for that donation. It says talking to people gets you iced by the FBI. Look at Fred Hampton, Malcolm X, and MLK. Fuzz, what can you say about these socialist voices that got targeted by the FBI for trying to bring unity?
So another thing that a lot of people need to realize is how the corporate media is utilized as an arm of the capitalist state in setting apart their preferred narrative. How the Black Panthers were often highlighted as thugs, swinging their guns everywhere on the cops and trying to make them seem evil in comparison, when the entire time that the only time that the Black Panthers harmed themselves was as a self-defense from the continued oppression that they were suffering under the police. And a lot of the times, the Lenin writes about this, that whenever legendary revolutionary figures are dead, the capitalist state will try to hollow them out and make them seem useless and harmless, like how MLK was, and his history was significantly nerfed from his much more radical aspirations right before he was assassinated.
Yeah, 100%. Jimmy Dore, another super chat, says half the left is controlled opposition.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Majority Report is on Comcast platform, Peacock app, along with Sam's MSNBC contract. Do you think that Sam Cedar is going to say anything that will tarnish that contract? Do you think that the mainstream media that pays Sam Cedar wants us to unite? They want us to stay distracted. That's why the mainstream media puts out all these stories to try to keep us divided, all these sensational stories to try to make us mad at our neighbor, instead of realizing that the real enemy are the ones that are paying the mainstream media, that are creating all these stories to distract us. So Charles, Marcus, and Fuzz, you guys want to add on to any of that?
Oh, I definitely want to add on to that. I mean, we got to remember one thing, and this is easy work for us, any of us, to find out. Graham is the one who put me onto this, Graham Elwood, if you guys are not sure what I'm talking about. But just look through CAA. Just literally look at the names. You got all of the TYT sitting right there with CBS reporters, The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. You literally have all these names sitting right there. So when they all start speaking in unison and just varying it up a little bit, and then, okay, this one will decide to have a different viewpoint this week, and then next week, this one will decide. But if you start paying attention to overall what they're saying, they're all saying the same thing. And they're all pushing a certain narrative. And the fact that they're all working for the same people and receiving a check from the same people and being represented by the same people, come on, people, let's wake up. This isn't that hard to figure out.
Absolutely. I'll follow up on that. And I think shout out definitely to you, Franco. You've got some big ears listening to Jimmy Dore's chatting here. But no, flat out, these people are trying to either lobby to get jobs on these networks, or they're trying to get some of the money to get funding for this stuff. You know, I said this when Jimmy was pushing the whole force the vote issue. It's mighty ironic for someone like Cenk Uygur or Sam Seder, or probably any of these people who don't have a healthcare struggle, to sit back and tell other people that, no, it's not the time to push for healthcare, when you've got people like myself who don't see a doctor on a regular basis. Anytime we've had injuries, we're trying to treat them at home. We still go out. You know, I've had a nagging neck injury and a knee injury for 5+ years now. I can't afford to get a damn thing done about it, and I have to fight through it and go bust my ass somewhere between 40 to 60 hours a week. Meanwhile, they sit there in the comfort of a chair and tell us all not to put pressure on politicians who, in some cases, their little institutions helped get elected, right? And now that they've gotten into politics, they've folded. Instead of sticking to their message, be a one-term congressperson and do the right thing. Now it's, no, I've got my hands on some health care. It's a hell of a lot better than my health care as a bartender. So let me just keep doing what I'm doing right now for myself, and you all can get to it later on. These people are the proverbial wolf in sheep's clothing. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's that simple.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The Jimmy Dore.
Could I add one more thing on? And shout out to Jimmy. It's amazing the work that he does over there, and we need voices like that. What I wish would happen is, instead of them wanting to go back and forth in back and forth Twitter exchanges, with Jimmy, if you guys really have that big of an issue, why don't you just sit down and have a live debate? Because
Absolutely.
you can't get away from anything there. You let everybody decide here and there, and then if you're not man or woman enough to step up for that debate, then that's pretty indicating also. So I already know the answer to this. You take Sam Seder, you take any of those clowns over there in the boutique left, and that's what you're going to get. I say come down and speak to somebody like me who works an average job, 8 to 5, busting my hump, and then get home and try to do content with all the studying and researching I do. Sit here and tell me in my face that, oh, well, no, this is all about Jimmy. Even if it was, let's just play devil's advocate. Let's say even if it was, it would be helping people. What is your problem? Why can't you guys get past that and just look at what the end result would be? That tells me it's nothing but jealousy and bitterness and stuff they're trying to do for clickbaits and ratings.
And you saw how Sam Seder folded when he was debating Brianna Joy Gray, because he wasn't expecting her to smack him down with facts. Yeah, it's not easy for Sam when he's not hiding in his studio, where he gets to control what is said, what questions get said when he's on his show, when he yells at people who call him, who try to hold him accountable. He can't do that.
And how ironic is it that when Jimmy went after AOC, the response was he's committing acts of violence because he's yelling or cursing.
Yeah, and then
what was Sam Seder's response to Brianna Joy Gray? I just spent 3 hours getting yelled at. No, dude, you spent 3 hours getting facts handed to you and getting
Let him
your ass
debate
handed
me.
to you by someone who knew what they were talking about.
Yeah, let him debate.
me.
Let him
You'll get yelled
debate
at.
Marcus.
You
Yeah,
would definitely get yelled at then. Because hey, it's none of that little soft, touchy, and I don't really care about your damn feelings either. So,
yeah, like he also tagged Nico one day, and then Nico was like, "All right, let's debate," and then he like disappeared, and then never even acknowledged Nico ever again. It's different when you have a moderator, and if it's not you who's controlling the questions and everything in your studio. So Jimmy Dore or Steph, thank you so much for the super chat again. Look, they're responding to what you said, Marcus, about CAA. Thank you for bringing that up, Marcus. He said yes. They said yes. CAA wrote that letter to Tulsi saying they would ruin her for backing Bernie and TYT, and TYT went right along with it. Yep. Robbie Yeager had a fantastic article about that. It's called "Tulsi Gabbard Has Enemies in High Places," and it gives a list of how many people are represented by CAA. And we have Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian on the same list as people who are in mainstream media. They're on the same list as Ben Shapiro. Like that like they're on the same email list, these people. So they all have an agenda. Jimmy Dore was saying like that when Cenk Uygur got the $20 million from Katzenberg, that he got an email that said they have to shift to the center. They have to pivot to the center.
Yeah,
like I'm telling you guys, like it's controlled opposition. It's controlled opposition. I think there's one more super chat. Let me see. I don't want to make sure I don't miss anything. So Shadow Ban Refugee, thank you so much. It says organizing means talking to people you disagree with to organize a path forward, not screaming fascist into an echo chamber. Jimmy Dore, Ali, Red Sea Simp. Yeah, 100%. Like, how are you going to change people's mind if you're just like fascist? You think that guy's going to be like, oh my God, I just realized I'm wrong. I got called a fascist. I got called a neo-Nazi. I got to change my ways now. And then Jimmy Dore and Steph also said they won't debate because look what happened to Cedar with Bree. Exactly. Yeah, go ahead, Marcus.
No. I was going to say, oh shit, I completely brain farted. Going ahead.
Fuzz and Charles, you guys want to say anything?
I've been going for a little bit. If you want to say something, Fuzz.
No, go ahead.
Oh,
okay.
Oh, I remember now. Sorry. What I was going to say is not only are they like on these same emails lists, I mean, they're literally represented by the same people. Now, let's extend that onto sports. When we see an athlete who's represented by a certain person, which CAA represents athletes also, you start noticing, somebody goes on The View, and then they're all of a sudden saying, well, Kamala, I think she would be a good pick. Or you see Ice Cube out there starting to talk about this, or whichever other celebrity, which you see out there, and they start, all of a sudden I'm thinking that this person who's running for governor in Tennessee would be a great choice for Democrat. And then all of these people, the reason why is because if they don't get to you through politics or somebody's stream, they got to try to get to you through another means. So they're going to try through sports, they're going to try through entertainment, through musicians, whatever, as long as they get you pushed into that direction.
Well said.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. I think they've definitely used celebrities, musicians to keep people pushed into the two-party spectrum there. But I'll say this, too. Going back to what you brought up about the money, give Ben Shapiro his credit, and I'm not going to give him that much. But when he debated Cenk Uygur, I think he made a good point. When Cenk was talking about getting the money out of politics, I agree with Cenk, but there was low-hanging fruit there for Ben to say, okay, how about all these people that gave you money? You got to understand that information that Jimmy leaked out to us, that when Katzenberg or whoever it was gave the money, they said, okay, you're going to have to tone it back down. What do you expect? That's what happens. That's why they buy you off. They saw that you were becoming successful. And you might look at it as, they just want to help our network. Okay, well, who's your source? They're
trying to sheep herd people.
Right. They're donating to Hillary Clinton. What did Hillary Clinton do to help people? You know what I mean? Hillary Clinton's got a disastrous record, and they thought she was the real deal, so they gave money to her. and now they want to give money to you. That something smells rotten in Denmark here. It shouldn't take a genius to figure out you don't want that money if you want to stay true to your cause. So if you're taking that money, understand this. Number one, there's going to be strings attached to it. Also, if you're willing to take that money, that tells me that you're not really in this to inform people, spread the truth, or make a difference. You got in this game to pretend to do all three of those things and capitalize, and you're really just in it for the money. And that makes you no different than CNN or any of these news networks. You know why? Mm-hmm. Because once upon a time, they started off as informative news. And then the minute they were allowed to get rich off of propaganda, what have we heard ever since?
Yeah, and it's always the case. Like, remember, like, there are some politicians who are like, yeah, I take corporate money, but it's not going to change me. Like, it's not going to change me. And then Cenk and Anna were saying the same thing. It's not going to change us. And even Kyle Kalinske was defending them. It was like, no, I know Cenk and Anna. They're not going to change.
Yeah.
What do we end up seeing?
Kyle Kalinske said that. He's like, they're a zebra that won't change their stripes or whatever analogy he gave. Well, yeah, I believe you just found the first two stripe shifting zebras, my friend, because they have definitely done some change.
Yep, 100%, man.
It almost seemed like when she switched to that blonde, platinum blonde look, that was almost like, okay, now I'm changing. And for those who are, into some of that conspiracy theory stuff, the MK Ultra, you guys know what I'm talking about out there.
Yeah.
Oh! I forgot. Since you brought up money, it was something that I did want to mention because I started out protesting. What was it when the Trayvon Martin stuff was going on? Jordan Davis, when I was living out in Florida, and it was basically Black Lives Matter already before it got the name, before it started moving, and when it turned into something and actually started growing, what happens? It gets basically taken over. If you guys don't believe me, look up how much money Black Lives Matter actually makes, and then tell me what they do with that money.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I remember hearing about that myself. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the super chat. Suffragium says, thank you, Franco. I appreciate tonight's guests and camaraderie. I would love to hear from Black Panthers and Anticonquista. Together, we are stronger. Don't let them divide us. We are brothers and sisters. Yeah, and I am definitely going to reach out to somebody to represent the Black Panthers. And Anticonquista is on my list to reach out to as well. I'll probably do it right after this stream. Reach out to them. Hopefully, I'll have them on as soon as possible, probably next week. So I do want to talk about one last topic. We were talking about, like, let's worry about what is the best path forward, like, after we take out the establishment. So just for, like, the sake of, like, just for the sport of it, is communism or a mixed economy the best path forward? I do want to start out with Fuzz here. Fuzz, you want to tell us what is the best path forward? Let's say we finally took down the establishment. The country is now ruled by us. What is the best path forward?
Well, we really do need to specify how we got to how victory was achieved.
How victory was achieved. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Because, all right, since we're playing with ideas, I might as well throw out a suggestion on a type of activism that I had in mind. And that's basically people utilizing the skills of a Robbie Yeager type to be able to dig into open secrets and perhaps via distribution, via pamphlets, the top dollar amount contributor to a certain politician's campaign. If they had any industries attached, said workers in this industry could strike and be able to achieve concessions like increase in wage, time off, or any of that. And you just keep applying that kind of pressure of
demanding concessions, coordinating strikes as a type of activism that would, over a period of time, would result in capitalism being overthrown. It's a very gradual process, and it's unique to every single country that tries to overthrow the system that is currently oppressing it. Because what revolution comes down to is a changing of the means of production from the ruling class over to the working class. And it's because it is against capitalism's intention to accumulate profit, it makes it, in my view, impossible for it to roll back to any sort of system where, in the arguments that libertarians are trying to make, to a period of pre-crony capitalism. Because one, the inevitable lobbying efforts to stop such a thing from happening in the first place, and two, I believe it's inherently contradictory to the system, to the economic system in the first place. So the only option left, if it's going to continue unchecked like this, it's either socialism or environmental collapse and destruction.
So Marcus and Charles, what do you guys say to that? What do you think?
I guess I'll yield to Charles. I'm curious to hear what he has to say.
So, me personally, and you kind of know my thoughts on this, Franco. Unlike some of my libertarian counterparts, where I believe the free market is the absolute answer and it's the best thing going today. No, I unlike a lot on the left, this is why I'm a true independent. I don't believe that capitalism is a pure evil. Okay. However, capitalism left unchecked, the greed of man is a real thing. The problem is we need the government we've got now to be gone. This is why we need the reform. This is why I said we've got to take our country back. The problem is when you had things like Citizens United that was passed, it allowed these corporations who had the greed, it allowed these rich people to start buying off politicians. Now, arguably, even if you get rid of Citizens United, there's still going to be backdoor deals. There's still going to be the potential of bribery, but that's why we need a government that's truly representing of the people. If they find this going on, these people need to be prosecuted and put in jail for accepting these bribes. They're there to work for the people, and that means the worker as well as the business owner. But there's a lot more workers than there are business owners, so they need to be representing us. They don't at the moment. But we need that mixed economy, in my opinion, not the mixed economy that we see today. We need what a real mixed economy is. What we need is something that creates the competition so that there's a better product for the best price. But what we also need is the government to be not intervening unless they have to, which means not allowing anyone to take monopolization of a market. That means less Walmarts. The thing is, a big reason why the government has been able to do that to these corporations and why they've been able to gather it is, again, because of one, the greed of man, and two, man's pretty lazy, especially a lot of people in our country. They don't have a lot of energy to have to go shop at multiple places. For some reason, we've become so spoiled as a society. We appreciate the one-stop shop of Walmart, even if you don't appreciate half the people you run into while you're there. You can appreciate being able to go to one place and buy clothes, groceries, electronics, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why they've been able to allow these corporations to constantly build, monopolize the market, shut down the little guy, kick out competition. They've flexed their muscle and gotten so big. We need to do what Teddy Roosevelt did. We need to come in and start busting these people up. That's how you get real competition. No one should be so strong that they can just railroad everyone off the market. Once it gets to that point, you're really not in capitalism anymore. You see what capitalism should be when you go down Main Street or you go to these small businesses, when you go to these food trucks. People like that who truly have to try to provide the best product for the best price to stay afloat. These massive corporations have gotten so much power, they don't have to do that anymore. So I'm for the mixed economy. I want to see those things happen, but the only way to keep those things happening is to have a government who can step in on behalf of the people when necessary. Right now, we've got a government who steps in on behalf of the corporations. That's very counterproductive.
So, Marcus, are you still there?
Yeah. That's what I would add in. It all depends on what we're looking at. It's the same thing like what Fuzz said. It depends on how this happens. Is it the politicians are out of office and we're in office and being controlled by the same donors that were controlling them? Or is it a complete teardown of the system? The monopolies are busted. These people are thrown in prison and or other things. If it's started from scratch, then we got a whole mountain of possibilities that we could do. But of course it would have to be some form of a mixed economy, because resegmenting everything back down it's just simple. If we're going to build bridges, all of us are going to have to chip in for that. If we're going to have fire departments and all of these, just things that are in a normal civil society. If you're going to have all those things, you're going to need some form of taxation and revenue to be able to handle it. Also, if we already have those things, I would instead flip to a system where we incentivize innovation and creativity. For instance, it would be a certain amount that every citizen could just apply for. First shot, you get it. And if you're able to create something that's able to contribute to mankind, you can apply for more grants like that. And that way we're able to let people's ideas flourish, actually, put together this guy who was really good with the technology, with this young lady who's really good with the communications, and then start actually building things instead of everything is built on profit, motivation. And so what happens is all of these people, they rise to the top, and then everything is being led through that lens, which is, kind of a caste system without the chains, basically.
Yeah. Fuzz, you have a response?
Okay, I do for Charles. I do want to question that. Does it make a lot of sense to apply the human emotion of greed to all of mankind when capitalism, as I generously would give it as an ideological existence from the 1500s up to the present day, when there has existed thousands of years of humanity in an actual mode of production called primitive communism, where there have been different tribes working together, hunting and gathering, and cooperating off of each other. So I'm not sure if it should be applied to humanity just because of an existing system that tries to establish as an accepted reality that greed is an inevitable part of human nature, which it is, but in this case, for the benefit of a system, it perpetuates this emotion.
Well, yeah, greed is perpetual in capitalism because you're obviously wanting to compete and succeed. But the difference is that there shouldn't be, if you're still small business and you succeed, you shouldn't be allowed to get to the point where you just start to excel past your business and just start crushing out everyone, because there's a lot of negative effects to that, But I will say this, yes, to me, it doesn't matter whether we're debating whether it's capitalism, whether it's socialism, whether it's communism. We brought up the Bible very early on in this video. Greed is traced all the way back to the Bible. I mean, you can go all the way back to Genesis and read about the early teachings of greed. How else would you describe when apparently two people are living in the Garden of Eden that have it on easy street? They're basically living like a heaven on earth lifestyle, and the only thing they're told is to not eat fruit from one tree, and Eve goes and eats fruit from that tree anyway because it's supposed to be the tree of God, supposed to have knowledge and all this stuff, right? She had pretty much everything she could want. Just don't eat that fruit. And yet she was able to be convinced to eat it anyway. Furthermore than that, let's examine their children, Cain and Abel. One was doing very well, grew great crops. The other was envious, so he killed his brother, tried to steal his wife, etc., right? That's greed. I mean, it goes all the way back, if you believe in such things, to the start of time. That being said, the greed's going to be there. To eliminate that aspect, you have to reform humans altogether. Now, while I agree capitalism is not been around since the beginning of time itself, it is in a lot of ways the more modern ideology. People long before capitalism were bartering and things like that. It's just the overall point. I think we can look at the things that we've seen over time and see that we had great growth from that kind of system. The biggest thing that I will say in my concern with, say, something like communism, where everyone has equal power, there's no one person to, say, run a corporation. I think what some people are not taking into consideration, some may say this is a weak argument, this is just kind of what I've experienced. Not everyone thinks the same. Unfortunately, there are people in this world who have a better mind for business, who have a better mind on how to handle the books, how to handle the accounts. Some people are better with working with their hands, other people are better with math, other people are better, looking at graphs. When everyone has the same amount of power, you've got to have someone who's kind of a figurehead to guide a ship. Not everyone handles that the same way. You've got to have these entrepreneurs. To have that, you've got to have the private entities. You've got to have private corporation. So that's kind of where that leads me. I understand the philosophy, don't get me wrong. It's just I also understand my interactions with people. For example, I'm very good at doing things with my hands. I don't know how well I could handle sitting in a cubicle all day long being a CEO. But there's people out there who excel at that kind of thing. So to give that equal power around, you've got to have, someone who can invest money just to keep products and services going. If we all bring home the equal amount of money and we own this corporation, how do we reinvest money into that corporation to develop a new product? Are we all going to chip in together? I mean, there's just a lot of questions there. So again, I understand the argument, but that's why I think that, to me, just from what I've seen, a checked capitalist system that is regulated in the proper way. I know the libertarians hate that regulation word, but there's good regulation, there's bad regulation. A lot of the regulation that we've seen within the last 20 to 50 years is regulation that makes it hard on small businesses to ever do anything. And the only people who can get past all the red tape and do a damn thing are people with plenty of money. Ironically enough, the people with the money that probably bought off the politicians. That's very counterproductive. That gets nothing done. That's not a capitalist system. And so I think so many people have looked at what we've seen growing over the years, and they've gotten it in their head, okay, this is what this leads to. It's what it leads to if it's not done properly. I think at the same time, we could make the argument to communism or socialism. If you don't do that properly, what could that lead to?
So I feel like Fuzz is itching to respond, but I do have a question for Marcus. But before I do that, I do want to say it is like humans, there is selfish aspects to humans, but we're also very social creatures, and a big reason why we got to where we are is because we've collaborated with each other. There is a collaboration aspect to us, like a what's it called, like we're like there's a quote, I think it's by E.O. Wilson, a biologist, who said that we are about like a percentage chimpanzee and another percentage we're a bee. Like we're like a beehive. Like we have to collaborate in order to excel. So there is some balancing there that we have to do that keeps our selfishness in check. But I have that question that I want to ask Marcus. But before I do that, I want to hear from Fuzz, because I feel like he's itching to respond.
So the thing is, there are already existing mixed economy examples, such as
Swedish, Finnish, Scandinavian, Nordic. So,
Hold on, Fuzz, we can barely hear you. Whose background noise is that?
Marcus.
Okay, there we go.
So the thing is, there's already pre-existing social democracies, both historically with Germany in the past and its Weimar Republic, and there's the current modern day examples of the Swedish, Nordic, and Scandinavian models as having capitalism and central planning having a weird marriage with each other. And the consequences of that are still, the class divide it still exists. There's the inevitable imperialism that's carried out with the NATO war budget, just because the money needs to come from somewhere, and it's the underdevelopment of the global south which ends up footing the bill. So, and as long as capitalism maintains its international links, it will always have a method of coming back and being way worse than it was before. Well,
So, if I could ask one thing there, Fuzz, I notice you're pointing out with the class divide. So, I hate to sound like the right winger here because I'm definitely not. But the one thing that I will point out is this. To me, I agree we've got class division that's not exactly being produced because of someone's hard work and merits. But if the argument is that everyone, regardless of the work they put in, should have the same wealth and the same level, the same social class, do you not agree that if someone's wanting to just sit on their ass and do nothing, that they inherently do not deserve the same rewards as someone who's willing to put in 100%? I mean, to me, that's unfair. To me, you're creating a race toward the bottom if you're saying that the people who want to be the dregs of society and do nothing should have the same amount of wealth and income as the people who do want to bust their ass. And I'm not necessarily referring to wealthy corporation owners. I'm simply referring to myself. We've got people right now who are perfectly willing to game our welfare state system, to just draw money, have multiple kids, and just try to live off the government. Whereas you've got people like me who are sitting here trying to be responsible, wait till I have the proper amount of income and can provide a stable home for a kid, and I'm busting my ass working 40 to 60 hours a week, and we're saying there should be no difference in a social class?
now, this is up to country that implements its socialism and how it decides to write out its constitution and the roles in that, the duties of the government that are supposed to fulfill everybody's most basic needs. Now,
Correct.
There is Michael Parenti writes about this in Black Shirts and Reds, where yes, all of those problems did exist in the Soviet Union, where there was a lot of disincentive for employees to work, and that there's an entire chapter called "And Nobody Is Minding the Store," where employees are actually just incentivized to provide bad service to people. Now, those problems definitely did exist, and they are real problems with socialism as it was carried out due to a seizure socialism that's America and other capitalist countries around the world constantly had an effect in stopping the development of actually socialism from taking full effect. And so this is often a lot of where criticisms of socialism and communism come in, but
again, all of these examples are taken from other countries, and it's it's a bit misguided to take apart those examples and attempt to copy and paste it to what would happen in America if socialism were to be implemented here, when the conditions for it being brought about could be radically different from China, Russia, Cuba, Venezuela. It's completely different because we stand as the wealthiest country in the world, and who knows how much it's going to translate the richest country in the world redistributing the pre-existing wealth over to the masses.
The U.S. is also not being sanctioned like how it sanctions all these other countries that want to attempt socialism, right?
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I do. Yeah. Just finish up. Sorry.
So, damn it, I lost my train of thought. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna ask Marcus. Is there any indication in the Bible that says capitalism or some form of capitalism, or like is evil, and that humans are inherently like greedy? Like, is there any indication of that in the Bible, or in history that you've seen? Marcus?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Yeah, there are literally people in the Bible which are described as just evil and wicked, and I'm not talking about like, oh, well, it's this one story of this one guy. No, like whole nations are described as like evil. Like a lot of the Canaanites were described as just evil and wicked people as a whole. That's the Bible saying that, not me. But it goes into detail with other things also. It also is funny that we were talking about like wealthy people, because it even talks about, how people will listen when a wealthy man speaks, but when a poor average person speaks, they're like, who is this guy? And it also says that they'll be kind of rushing to trip that person up to see them fall. And so it's kind of what we have with this whole kind of Sam Cedar kind of thing. People listen to these bigger platforms just because some of them are bigger platforms, whether they actually have good content or whether they're actually pushing a serious message to try to help somebody. And they will listen to a smaller platform and like, who is this dude? What the hell does he know? I guess one thing I want to say on there's so many ways I could probably dissect and go about, the whole capitalism versus communism, socialism, and all that. For one, there's not very many actual socialist countries. There's literally, in my opinion, only one. Well, was only one, and that would have been Bolivia. The rest of them are mixes of socialism and capitalism. Another thing is, if you got to a point where you went for, and even China, even though they have socialism in their name, that's not socialism. They're doing some other stuff. Because through principles of socialism, there wouldn't be that stratification throughout the economic system. You wouldn't have all these billionaires and then poor people at the same time. So that's proof that it's obviously not socialism. But when we're going into communism, effective communism, when it's worked in the past, communism works at a small scale. When you start trying to scale it up to a nation of over 330 million people with a whole bunch of different customs and cultures, coming from a bunch of different places, different ideologies, that is going to be messy. It's not like when we're talking about these other, communist nations or socialist nations over time, and they come from, kind of a homogenous, ethnicity, and, similar backgrounds and similar culture. And that makes it a little bit easier to all be on the same page. But when you take all of these different people from all of these different nations, all of these different ideas and philosophies, and just think that they're all going to just mesh into communism perfectly fine, I think that it's a little, I don't take this the wrong way, but I feel it's a little naive.
I will say that just because there's billionaires in China, it doesn't mean that they're not socialists, right? As far as Fuzz, correct me if I'm wrong, because I said this before in another podcast. I said that socialism is a process and communism is the end goal, and because that is what China is trying to achieve. It's trying to achieve communism. It's still a socialist country. It's a socialist country with Chinese characteristics. So you want to add on anything to that? Am I on the right track here, Fuzz?
Yeah, essentially. Though I just want to mention that it's after the overthrowing of capitalism where the process begins with socialism and essentially workers taking control of the states and establishing themselves as having more of a power in collective action rather than capitalist bureaucracy or exploitation. For example, there could be a string of apartment complexes that all want to pay into having their rents reduced. They're able to do that as long as they go through the election process that would be established of a direct democracy to be able to let them do these kind of actions and be able to establish
Hello? Hello? Fuzz, what happened?
No, I'm still here. Sorry. Hang on.
Something must have happened. Yeah, hello?
Okay, perfect. So where was I?
You were talking about electing and through direct democracy.
Yeah, it would be the end of representative government where federal officials would be able to be recalled at any time, given that there's enough demand for people to call back their representatives if they're not performing like as their constituents want. And most of the energy would be most utilities would become publicly owned. And China right now, as a socialist country, it's been 70-ish years since Mao has overthrown that capitalist system in China. And when they got through over 100 years of humiliation under Britain and the U.S. So the process for socialism can take an undetermined amount of time. And it's unique to every country. We're not supposed to know or speculate about how it's supposed to function moving forward. It's the same thing with we can't speak to what socialism would look like in the U.S. because it's so far away. I'll be honest, and I don't think it's achievable. It will be achievable in my lifetime, but I won't stop arguing for it.
Yeah, and also one other point too about China is that though there are billionaires, doesn't the state still have more control over their billionaires? Whereas in the U.S., the billionaires have control over the state, more control over the state.
Yes, that's a good point. And one thing that I'll say on this as well is, again, the concept behind what we're talking about with this socialism and in the path to communism, the idea behind it is not hard to understand here. My biggest concern is the practicality of how well it's truly going to work, because I feel like the big premise is that when everybody has the same power, everybody has the same brain, and I just don't think people do. For example, if people were that well informed, and this is a good point to what Fuzz said about how it's not going to be achievable in our lifetime. If everyone had that much common sense to just have that power and do the right thing, how come we can't get rid of Democrats and Republicans? People can't seem to get enough common sense just to vote their enemies out of office. Now, when you give them unmitigated power to control things, I'll give another argument. This is something I just made a video about, and I mentioned it last Friday. A huge percentage of the country thinks that a way to help people have better income is by raising the minimum wage. Now, I mean, regardless whether you're left or right, you've got to look at the facts, and you've just got to look at the charts and the path over time and admit when you force a business to pay someone more money, a huge corporation might have tons of profits they could tap into, but they're not going to want to. And a small business might not even have that kind of profit. So the small business has to find a way more than likely to pay for that raise. The huge corporation, while they may not have to, they're going to do it anyway because they don't want to make less money. That incentivizes one of three things, if not all three of these things or multiple. Layoffs to cut back on staff, raising of prices, and automation if they can just replace people, and they're going to do that anyway, but you just give them more incentivization to do it. So, for example, take the fast food worker, okay? They are one of the biggest groups out there who probably feel like they're making starvation wages. Okay, gradually over time, go to McDonald's, go to Panera Bread. They've started to sneak kiosks in, right? When you force them to raise wages, they're probably just going to eliminate the cashier and just go to a kiosk system. Now, how did that $15 an hour help you? Again, this is my idea that there's a lot of people who have ideas. If it is pure direct democracy, you're going to take their knowledge as it stands right now and give them complete control of the system, and yet they can't figure out that maybe the better thing to do instead of a forcing of the raising of a minimum wage would be a proper UBI system. Now, ironically enough, I put a Twitter poll out and everybody voted for the UBI, but there's still a large chunk of people in the country right now who think that raising the minimum wage is a good idea. I think if you look at the facts, you can find a lot of negative drawbacks that are going to come from that. I think over time, you can look at the fact that that was done in the first place as a way to hurt minorities. Libertarians have made that argument for a long time. But I don't see where a UBI is going to have those same drawbacks, yet I'm not hearing so many calls for that as I am for the minimum wage. So taking these same people, giving them that direct democracy power to control everything, you think if they're not able to think things through that well now that it's just going to all of a sudden happen on this larger scale? I just don't see that happen.
But wouldn't like when we had like kings and stuff and emperors, wouldn't they make the same argument? Like they'd be like, oh, we're gonna let these people think like that they can choose the right leader. Like if we give them the power to vote for the right leader, like
understand this. That was just like one person. That was the whole point of our structure. Was the founding fathers understood there's people who have a brain for this and there's people who just never studied it. So for example, someone who studied business for years and years and years and understands how one operates is going to have more knowledge than a guy who just studied to be, I don't know, an auto mechanic, for example. If they've studied figures, they're able to crunch numbers. Different people have different levels of knowledge. It comes from different types of education, how far they went through education. For example, there's people who went to high school, got a high school diploma, went on to college. And you've got people like one of my grandpas who had to drop out in the 6th grade to go out and start working to help support the family at a very young age. Now, my grandpa in a lot of ways is a smart man, has a lot of common sense, but if you start talking a lot of these facts of business, he's in way over his head. He will get heavily frustrated. But it's just not something he's able to really comprehend. And so that's a big problem. The founding fathers even understood not everybody's got this vast wealth of knowledge of how these gears turn, how these machines operate. So you need elected people that are supposed to go to represent the people who have a better understanding of how these things operate. They're there to do what's best for you. That's why we elect them. And then when they get there, they are supposed to carry these things out. That was the original premise. We've very much, in my opinion, drifted far off from it. One argument I've made is, first of all, I don't think we ever should have abandoned the original way we would determine a president and a vice president, because that forced them to have to work together, because the runner-up was your vice president. I think we should have stuck with that. But that's the argument there is, yeah, the kings made that argument, but that's just one person. That's why we need a government that consists of multiple people who we elect, who have a knowledge for this sort of thing. You see what I mean?
But isn't the failure of people not knowing enough, like because of there's not enough democracy, because there's people that aren't educated enough, because there's some oligarchs that control our education system. And so if it was actually controlled by the people, then we would have a better education system.
Well, you would have a better education system, but you still can't make someone absorb the education at the same time. It's the old cliche, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. There's always going to be examples of where you can make it as great as you want, but what if someone doesn't want to learn? And there's plenty of examples of that. There was plenty of kids when I was in school. Other people would be trying to learn in class. They'd goof off. You know what I mean? And unfortunately, the way society is right now, you're talking about, to get to that, you're going to have to really improve the education system, but you're also going to have to probably change a lot of things in pop culture, because nothing that's really what's popular today promotes really trying to learn for yourself. Everyone's so absorbed with playing a video game, listening to music that doesn't really promote education. And I can't say much. I listen to it myself, but some people like me can listen to that and still study. Other people don't. I mean, that's what they get absorbed in. They get absorbed. It's like a pastor of mine said a long time ago. He called television a one-eyed devil. Okay. The power it's got to warp the mind and people get absorbed into that. You could improve the education system, but how are you going to make them absorb that knowledge if they don't want to? It's a gamble.
So I'll throw this over to Fuzz, but I want to say, like, isn't our pop culture, like the way that we have it set up, because it's determined by these oligarchs, like these record company CEOs, isn't that because there's not enough democracy? Fuzz, what do you say?
So I would mention that there is always, throughout most of history, there has always been a stable fact in that there has always been a means of production, whether it be slave society, medieval, and the monarchy, or the present day. There has always been a dominant class over there's always been a dominant class over a working class. And the reason this needs to be stated is that in a base, and what Marxists call the base and superstructure theory, you have the base, which is primarily dominant as the seat of power and of government, which shapes and maintains arts, culture, politics, and then that in turn subsequently shapes and affects and maintains the current structure that is tailored to it in order to keep justifying its existence. You have Aristotle not being the biggest fan of democracy, and Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle all learned from each other and taught, I think it was called the myth of three metals, that people were born with souls of gold, the philosopher kings, the souls of silver for soldiers, and brass was everybody else, trying to corral and put people into their own respective classes. And the means and how they tried to justify it was with stepping outside and just spreading their arms and saying, see, look how great everything is. And the problem is that Michael Parenti mentions many ancient societies and property relations justified by totem myths of creation And these were used so those with more property can justify their greater property holdings. And there used to be something in the Roman Senate that was essentially functioned like a conservative veto whenever democratic tendencies tended to pop up. And this was the dominant culture of their time. It's the reality that people were not able to escape. And it eventually collapsed Rome itself due to the many contradictions that it had. Now, if you move on to the monarchy, you have the investiture controversy, which sprouted up around the 11 to 1200s, where there was a constant fight arguing between the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor over who gets to appoint bishops versus who gets to crown the emperor. And so matters of the divine rights were just settled with human interactions, deals, humiliation acts, and with material reasons. And yet the religion was so benefited by having a monarchy to have absolute power over the dominion or kingdom that the monarch ruled over. This is a thing that's always been apparent in society, and how capitalism issues propaganda to create the myth of pulling yourself up with your bootstraps, or the American dream, how it's next to impossible to achieve for next to anyone, unless you already have the pre-existing capital to make that wealth.
Yeah, so I want to bring Marcus into the conversation, and then I'll throw it over to Charles after, and then we'll wrap this up. We could probably continue this debate another time. I think we had a good, healthy discussion here. So Marcus, you want to say any last things about this topic?
You know what? It was so much thrown out that I can't respond to. I would say that, Fuzz, I think you need to do a little bit more studying on history. And if you're going to start speaking about historical things, try to be accurate in what you're saying. You threw around a lot of stuff, and you weren't very accurate on a lot of things. And so I will leave it that part on that. Another thing which I'll say is when you start going into Marx, I don't know if you know this or not, but Marx was controlled opposition also. He was sent over $500 million from the Rothschilds. So when you start going into Marx and what he was doing, and not understand the struggles that were going on within the kingdoms and how they were trying to overthrow kingdoms and things like that, and you start going into religion was this and this and that, and religion is very complex. Just the Bible alone is complex, not even going into all the different other religions and what people were thinking. And so before you start just loosely talking about some of those things, I think you should do a little bit more research.
I'll throw one thing out, and I'm going to start by saying this too, and I'm pretty sure, Franco, you've been with me long enough. The accusation that I'm a bigot for saying what I just said, which I take offense to, that someone actually said that I'm a bigot at the root, that's preposterous. I'm just simply here advocating, if someone can change my mind, because I'll be honest, we've talked about religion. Do I think that Jesus was an advocate of capitalism? No. Jesus was not, from anything I've ever read, an advocate of a capitalist system. Jesus was an advocate of, really, communism. I mean, you look at a lot of what Jesus said in the Bible about it's harder for a rich man to enter heaven than for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle, for God's sakes, okay? Jesus was more aligned with communism, but guess what? He also described of the perfect place where these things can be achieved. He described it as being heaven. Humans are imperfect. As long as humans are imperfect, it's going to be kind of hard to develop this perfect system. What I can point to where I've seen where people were able to do good, you can still point to there was suppression of minorities, obviously, but look what happened to unchecked capitalism. This is why I say I'm not a fan of it. We got what happened in 29. We got the stock market crash. Okay, look what FDR did. He brought in socialist elements. That's why I just pitched for a UBI a moment ago. That's a socialist element, right? There's elements you can bring in, mend the two together to create a better system as a whole. You look at a lot of the things, you hear the libertarians, the Republicans, the right wing, private sector jobs. Well, when FDR came into power, he created a lot of government jobs. He created a jobs program. You ever heard of the Tennessee Valley Association? Do you know how many people throughout the South who lost their farm as a result of things like the Great Depression, who were able to go out and make a steady income again thanks to things like the Tennessee Valley Association? So by no means do I think private sector is the answer for everything. My argument is there's a benefit to one, there's a benefit to the other. There's cons to one, there's cons to the other. Why should you be so tunnel vision to just adhere to one concept when you could broaden your mind and figure out how you could put the two things together and have the best outcome? And I think we've seen a result of that at one point in our history. There were still things, we didn't have the civil rights. We didn't have that done yet. But as far as what we were experiencing with jobs and whatnot, we still had protectionism. Our manufacturing was doing great. We could get to that point again, in my opinion, under the right circumstances. That's where I'm coming from, and by no means do I think that is a bigot point of view.
Yeah, I'll say stay away from. I'm throwing this out there for the audience. We have respectful conversations here. Like, we have disagreements here, but let's stay away from name calling, because all that's going to do is create more division, more anger, and that's going to create more barriers. Another thing I'm gonna say is that I know that I need to brushing up more of my history on Marx. I haven't. I personally have not read theory. I'm getting into learning more about Marxism and all that. But from what I know is that Marxism is not about the person Marx. That it is a science, like how Newton, like gravity and all that. That is a science. It's not really about the person who discovers it. It's about the science. But I think we had a really great and healthy discussion here. And I want to say I love you guys. Like, you guys are great guests, and that I really want to have back on again.
Can I say something real quick?
Yep.
I just had to address because it was eating at me. The founding fathers' intention was to basically just make money and only, create a nation for themselves. They were not intending on everybody being educated or trying to help the population as a whole. They were more concentrated on their own personal wealth. Another thing, the minimum wage thing, the reason why there's a problem with that always is because minimum wage should have been tied to inflation. The same way UBI should be tied to inflation if it's put in. If the minimum wage matched with inflation on average, it would be like $30 an hour. That's just theft, which these major corporations are doing. Now, ways that they can make it work is they can put in exemptions or tax statuses for small businesses to be able to keep up if they wanted to, if you had a government who was thinking that way.
I agree.
Yeah. Fuzz, you want to give any?
That's been an argument when I have debated where the minimum wage should be done. The only case I've ever really supported it is not a federal minimum wage, but when the federal government leans in on the states to pass minimum wages for their states that are reflective of their economy. The cost of living in South Carolina, and I actually showed this, around the average cost of a home in South Carolina, if I'm not mistaken, when I did my video, was about $165,000. Average cost of a home in New York is over $200,000. So the cost of living really differs depending upon where you go. And so the idea that this blanket minimum wage is just going to affect everyone the same way, it's just not true. a state minimum wage, even though I still believe you could have some of those negative drawbacks, and the only way you're going to avoid that would be to create this very detailed system which states if you do a minimum wage, you can't do this, this, and this, and in return, we will give you a tax cut for your business. If you do cause layoffs, if you do jack up prices, if you do automate, you don't qualify for these tax exemptions. You might be able to kind of control some of that. You might get companies to kind of listen to you. But the problem is, for God's sakes, we can't get this government to put something half that commonsensical together. The next problem there is going to be, and well, I wouldn't say a problem, but this idea of getting the states to do it. If someone's concerned, like, well, what if they don't do it? What if they don't do it? Okay, to show you how the federal government has applied that pressure in the past and got those results. It's not a federal law that you wear a seatbelt. It's state laws. You know why every state did it? Because the government gives states money and they put pressure on them and said, we want you to do this. In exchange, we'll give you money. It's not necessarily a federal law that you have to be 21 to smoke cigarettes. Certain states raise it to 21 instead of 18. I think for the most part, there's multiple laws we can point to. A lot of safety things. I mean, it's things where the government has leaned in and told the states, this is what we want. You pass it, and in exchange, we'll give you this in return. Why could they not do that for a minimum wage that reflects those states?
Yeah, Fuzz, you want to give any final words?
All I can say is it's only a capitalist system that would force one to choose between UBI and a $15 minimum wage when both in this economic system are routes to failure. The people's basic needs need to be covered with, I guess, a very high UBI would be the only closest answers that I could give to if I had to choose one or the other.
Yeah. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Let's not forget that we want to have these discussions, and we can't forget that it's not your enemy's not your neighbor. It's not right versus left. It's not black versus white or brown versus white or brown versus black. It's us versus the top, bottom versus top. All right. So
Absolutely.
Thank you guys so much. My guests, Charles, Marcus, and Fuzz. And thank you so much to the audience. You guys are awesome. I love you guys. And don't forget to stay informed.